Good evening and welcome to the Shrewsbury Historical Society. This is our March 2021 presentation. Thank you very much for joining our program tonight. We have a wonderful speaker planned. Next is our Curator's Report by Christine Gustafsson.
Curator Linda Davis reports that a set of VHS tapes about Shrewsbury history are being transferred to a digital format, and that the Society loaned items to Lamoureux Bogano Associates to scan for the new Beale School history wall. She's also completed a catalog of the research in the Cormier collection.
Okay, thank you. Next is our Treasurer's Report. Christine Gustafsson will report.
Treasurer Ann Folan reports that all bills are paid and all the taxes are being prepared. Next year's budget will also be discussed in the coming weeks. Applications are now being accepted for 2 Shrewsbury Historical Society scholarships, each in the amount of $500. Applicants must be high school seniors who live in Shrewsbury and attend school in Shrewsbury and are enrolling in college in the fall. Applications are available online at our website, shrewsburyhistoricalsociety.org, and they are due by March 31st.
Okay, thank you very much. Shrewsbury Historical Society, tonight our presentation is Remembering the Coconut Grove Fire by Stephanie Schorow. Wednesday, March 24th. Shrewsbury channels 38 and 328 are available on demand line. And about the program, author Stephanie Schorow will explore the story of the Coconut Grove nightclub fire, which took place in Boston on November 28th, 1942. It took the lives of nearly 500 people, including many from Central Mass. Stephanie shares her groundbreaking research into one of Boston's most devastating fires. About the presenter, the Boston-based freelance writer, journalism instructor Stephanie Schorow is the author and co-author and editor of 8 books on Boston history, including the Coconut Grove Fire. Stephanie has worked as an editor and reporter for the Boston Herald, the Associated Press, and numerous other publications. Stephanie lives in Medford, Mass, and frequently speaks at libraries, community centers, and historical societies in the greater Boston area. Okay, thank you, Stephanie.
Wow, thank you, thank you. First of all, I want to thank the Shrewsbury Society for inviting me to speak. This is a very sad tale, but it's something that's very important. And I just want to put in a plug for the work that you do, because if it wasn't for people like you who do the work of collecting and preserving history, my job as a writer would be so much harder. So I really, really want to thank you for everything that you do. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to share my screen, and that's always a little bit screwy, but we'll make it work. Okay, hang on. And let me get this going. Come on. There we go. I think that should be going. So just to put you in the mood, I'm just going to play a few bars of Jacques Renard's Coconut Grove Orchestra. So this is the music of the era that we're talking about back in the 1940s. So this is an actual recording that I managed to find. So we won't play the whole thing. Okay, so oops, except it sometimes wants to play whether I like it or not. So my name is Stephanie Schorow, and I have written, as they said, a number of books on Boston history, and here are some of them. And I really, this is something I really enjoy doing. I'm a former journalist. And so I feel like in journalism, you write the first draft of history, and in books, you write the second or third. So that's something I really enjoy putting together. So let's talk a little bit about the Coconut Grove Fire. This happened in 1942, and I think a lot of people who are watching this right now know about this. I don't think it's any surprise a lot of people in the Boston area know about it. So why do we continue telling the story over and over again? This is more than 75 years ago. What is left to tell? Why do we keep repeating it? Well, for a lot of reasons. Here's why. Station nightclub fire, February 20th, 2003, 100 dead. Ghost ship warehouse fire, December 2nd, 2016, 36 dead. The Grenfell Tower fire in London, June 14th, 2017, 79 people dead. These are why we have to keep repeating the lessons of the Coconut Grove, because guess what? We still haven't learned them. After all this time, we still have to repeat the lessons. So let me go into a little background about the fire and about the club. And this is a kind of an overview of where, this is from the newspaper of the day, and it kind of shows you where the club was. This gives a sense of the footprint there. It was in the area we call Bay Village. It's the streets are all changed, so everything has changed. But this is roughly where it was located. There was Broadway was on the other side, Church Street, and then now what is Coconut Grove Lane. Actually, there was no street there at that time, but that's just to give you a sense of where it was in the city of Boston. Here's another picture of it that gives a sense of where it was located. And here's another one. Obviously, this is after the fire, but it gives you the sense of the place. Now, how did it start? Well, it was at one point one of the most famous and well-heeled nightclubs in Boston. It was founded in 1927 by a couple of entrepreneurs, a Mickey Alpert, who was kind of a furniture salesman who wanted to be sort of a comedian and an entertainer, and Jacques Renard. That wasn't his real name, but he was quite the musician, and he was very popular. So they joined forces. They took over an old garage, and they put together a nightclub. They named it after the Coconut Grove Hotel and nightclub in Los Angeles. So people say there's another Coconut Grove nightclub. Yes, there was. There was one in California, and our Coconut Grove was modeled after it. Here's a look at the opening. You notice that it's very only $3 per person to get in. Here's a look at the menu for the opening night. You can see that it was called Renard Coconut Grove because he was very famous, but just look at some of the things that were for sale there in terms of food. And a lot of puns and a lot of play on words with Jacques Renard and Lippy, a guy named Lippy here was the maitre d'. So it was a very la-di-da kind of setup. So here's a picture of the outside of the club from the 1930s. And it's a very rare picture, but you can see it had this very distinctive marquee on one side. And then this is a look inside the club. This is a picture that you see fairly often, and that's Andrew Lippy, who was the maitre d'. And if you look at this, you get a sense of a spaciousness. You get a sense that this was a big club, and it had a South Scene theme. It had coconuts. It was had the lighting was kind of unusual. But let me show you some other pictures. This is shows you another angle, which shows you it was a little smaller. And if you look at the top of the photo here, you can kind of see daylight coming in, and that was because the roof of the Coconut Grove could be rolled back so people could dance under the stars. And that was kind of one of the very glamorous things about this club. But you can see it wasn't all that big. Here's another look at it. And you can see, yeah, there were coconuts and all this stuff, but it was not a particularly spacious club, certainly not like the one in LA. So what happened to Jacques Renard and Mickey Alpert? Well, they kind of ran afoul of a few things. One thing, when they opened it in 1927, there was a little rule that kind of prevented them from making money, and that was called prohibition. And they were not in the position where they wanted to sell a lot of illegal hooch, but they couldn't make a living without it. And then one of their investors kind of turned out to be a fraud. So they ended up selling out to this gentleman over here, Charles Solomon, or as they used to call him, King Solomon. And King Solomon was quite the character. He was I think the most well-known gangster in the Boston area at this time. We're talking about the 40s, but he had his fingers in a lot of different pies. And, he was almost like a Hollywood type of gangster, because you can see him here. Look at him. He's in his jacket, and he would hold forth at the Coconut Grove, walk around to the people. How you doing? How you doing? You like the steak? Is steak good? You don't like steak? Get this guy a new steak. He was that kind of person. So he had quite the kingdom right there in the club, and he snuck a lot of booze in. But he was lucky too, because in 1933, the prohibition was lifted, and so he looked to make a big profit on the club. But something happened. King Solomon liked to party, and one night after hours, he was in this club here called the Cotton Club, which is on, I believe, is on Piedmont Street in the South End, and he was ambushed by some people who apparently didn't like the way he was running the city. Was it resisting arrest? Was it a hit? We don't really know, but we do know that that he was there with a bunch of people. He excused himself to go to the bathroom, and some guys followed him. They got in an argument. Shots rang out. The guys fled, and King Solomon staggered out, clutching his stomach, saying, "The dirty rats, they got me." And I know that's true because that was in the Boston Herald. So, anyway. King Solomon, exit King Solomon. By the way, here's his funeral procession to Forest Hill. So he was very well known. I mean, as you know, Boston has a curious relationship with bad boys. So enter Barney or Barnett Wilansky. Wilansky was King Solomon's lawyer, and he was a very well connected and very smart lawyer, and he took over the club. We're not quite sure how, but he managed to take it over from various parties, and he started to run the Coconut Grove. You know, prohibition was now lifted, and they could run it as a really good, profitable business. For example, here we go. Here's a look at the club that kind of shows it. So you see the club had kind of a big had a big footprint, but it was based into little rooms. For example, here's the dance floor. I showed you those pictures earlier. Okay. And here's a foyer, and here was something called the Caricature Bar. And then I'll talk about what's downstairs, but you can see that it also led to another lounge. And this was something called the Broadway Lounge, or just the new lounge, that Barney Wilansky opened up just a few weeks before the fire, because he wanted to expand this. So he expanded the footprint of this club. This is a sort of picture of above and below, because here was the dance floor. Here's the this new lounge. It was kind of built around houses there. And then downstairs, there was something called the Melody Lounge. It was kind of set up to be kind of like a speakeasy. It was kind of underground, and it was kind of spooky and dark. And that was the idea of putting a different place. So you can see that the club was a series of different rooms. And I think that's important to remember as we go into the history of what happened that night of the fire. This is one of the rare views of the new lounge on Broadway, and you can see those block windows there, and you can see the man behind the bar. That was Tiny Shea. He was the bartender. And in typical fashion, he was named Tiny. Okay, so let's talk about the night of November 28th, 1942. Now, the club had actually been inspected just earlier, and it seemed like everything was fine. They looked at it, and it doesn't seem like there were any problems with it. And there was something very important going on that day to Boston, and that was a football game between the Boston College and Holy Cross. And everyone expected that that Boston College would defeat Holy Cross. And it was a big deal in terms of football. The game was played, as you can see, at Fenway Park. And it was a big deal. And a lot of people in Boston went to this football game. They wanted to see Boston College defeat Holy Cross. Well, the unbelievable happened. And that is that the Eagles, the BC Eagles, lost to Holy Cross. And everyone was very upset. And then a number of people who were apparently going to go to the club, to the Boston, to the Coconut Grove that night to celebrate, decided not to go. But a few people went. And a lot of Holy Cross fans went to the club. Now, who was at the club that night? Everybody. I mean, the one thing I want to stress about the Coconut Grove is that it was a nightclub for all strata of people. There was older people, like people celebrating their anniversaries. There were young people. There were sailors and soldiers bringing in dates. There were even kids. There were a number of young people brought in by their parents. We'll talk about that. But the idea was that everyone was there, and there was a roving photographer who'd go around and take people's pictures, run out and develop them, and then bring them back and sell them. And this is one of those pictures that was, unfortunately, I don't think ever picked up. There was also one special guest there, and let's see if we can play another little bit of music here. I don't know if anyone recognizes this, but this is the official music for the Buck Jones fan club. And Buck Jones at this time was a very, very popular movie star, cowboy star. And he was a little bit on the wane, but he had been in more than 166 movies, mostly Westerns. But he was really well-known, beloved. He had his own fan club. And he was in Boston for a bond drive, and he was also promoting his new movie. So he was there that night, and he did a lot of things in the city, including performing at the Boston Garden and doing rope tricks. And then later on the day, he was really tired, and he was fighting cold. And he said, you know, I want to cancel everything. I don't want to go out. So he canceled his last events of the day, went back to his hotel room. But then he was going to go out that night to the Coconut Grove with people from the movie industry, and they prevailed on him to come. I mean, this was their chance of being near a movie star. So he, kind of like a good cowboy, put on his boots and went out to the Coconut Grove. He was accompanied by his PR man, a guy named Marty Sheridan, who was a former journalist and who's someone I had an opportunity to interview. He has passed on, but he was there. Marty Sheridan was there. He was there with his wife. Buck Jones was there, and all these people in the movie industry were there at the Coconut Grove that night. So what happened? Well, basically, let me set the stage a little bit. The place was packed. People were jammed into this club. I mean, a lot of witnesses talked about that they had so many people crammed in there. They didn't have room for all their coats. Some people actually left because they couldn't get in. Probably not as many as people will tell that story, but some people weren't able to get in. And so it was jam-packed that evening. People were putting more tables on that dining area, trying to cram everyone in so they could eat dinner. And it was just filled to overflowing. So what happened? We think about 10:15 p.m., and a lot of this is speculation. A busboy in the downstairs Melody Lounge lit a match to put in a light bulb. Some sailor or soldier had unscrewed the light bulb. He wanted a little more privacy for his girl. And the bartender saw that and said, hey, buddy, you can't do that. So he sent the bartender, a guy named Stanley Tomaszewski, to go screw the light bulb back in. Now, he couldn't see where the light bulb went, so he lit a match. Now, very soon after that, if not immediately, the palm tree where the bulb was caught on fire. And the fire from the palm tree started catching the cloth ceiling over the Melody Lounge ceiling. It was a cloth, there was a cloth ceiling there. And at first it seemed funny, oh, look, it's on fire. But then the fire quickly got out of its control. It roared up the stairs from the lounge into the main dining area. And in just like 3 minutes, the main dining area was consumed with flames. The flames continued to spread. They spread into the new Broadway Lounge, which is amazing when you think about the different rooms there. It spread into about 10:20. The first victims came to the Boston City Hospital by 10:35, and then the fire was out by 10:45. So we're talking about something that was incredibly rapid and incredibly destructive. This is not exactly, there's a lot of problems with this illustration, but it really shows you how the fire went. It started downstairs in the Melody Lounge, and it spread up into the main dining area, somehow spread through this warren of hallways and into the Broadway Lounge. So it really spread to the whole thing, and it spread into these areas in here. This is actually the corner where we think that the fire started. It's the palm tree, the Melody Lounge. And this is a piece of the cloth that is supposedly covered the Melody Lounge. It's in the Boston Public Library. We don't know for certain, but it's there right now. And here's a picture of the downstairs lounge, still smoking, and the stairways that people came out. Now, here's where the tragedy really comes in. So let me go back here. People rushed up the stair to get out of the lounge. There was no other way. I mean, some people managed to sneak through the kitchen, but most of the clients said, oh, we just got to go out the way we came in. They went up to the top of the stairs, and there was a door. There was a door that led to the outside. It had a little press bar on it, so you could press on it and it would supposedly open up, but it was locked and it was bolted shut. So they couldn't get out there. So some people managed to go by, but a lot of people got trapped here behind this door and never got out. A lot of people went to the revolving door. The main entrance of the Coconut Grove was a revolving door. You can see it here. This is after the fire. But this is the entrance that most people knew. They went through the revolving door under the marquee, and that's how they got in. So a lot of people rushing up from the downstairs decided to get out there. Now, not everyone tried to get out there. A lot of them went to try to get their coats and their belongings. And that's not as odd as it sounds. A coat was a very valuable piece of property. You lose your coat. It's major money in those days. And they tried to get out this revolving door. And again, it's the feeling that you try to go out the door that you come in. And so unfortunately, the doors of this revolving door jammed and it wouldn't move. So people were trapped there. They couldn't go out and they couldn't get back in. They were jammed there. Now, the fire spread through the entire complex. And let me show you this illustration here, because what happened, what really caused a death was there were too many locked doors in the place. There was a locked door at the top of the stairs from Melody Lounge. You couldn't get out there. There was a door here that had been blocked up that was no longer in use. There was a door here, but it was locked too. And they managed to get it open, but it took a while. This door here, which was the door where the staff and the people, the singers and the musicians all used this stair, this was locked too. There was right here, there was a boarded up window. And then over here, one of the most tragic things came about with the door in the Broadway Lounge, because people rushed in there to get out. And there were two doors, and the first door to get out opened inward with the flow track. It didn't open inward. So it got pushed closed and people could not get out there. They could not get out through those block windows that I showed. So a lot of people died in this area. So there were deaths at these area all around the building. Now, I want to play a little video here for you. This is Marshall Cole. He was a tap dancer, was a dancer, or they actually was a chorus guy. He was a chorusman. And he worked there the night of the fire. There were a lot of chorus girls, there were musicians, and he was at the 2013 dedication of something called the Coconut Grove Lave. And I just grabbed him and I did a little movie with him. And I think his story is pretty compelling. So let me see if I can play this for you.
When did you know something was wrong?
Well, when I heard some rumbling, I was up in my dressing room. That was on the roof level. And I heard some commotion. So I opened up the door to look down to see what was going on down below. I figured there would be a big fight. It was a football, that there was a rumble. Well, as I went down the stairs, all of a sudden there was a big cloud of smoke and sparks and flames and the smoke. So I said, ooh, I'm going to go back to my dressing room. And I'm going to get my stuff, gather it all up, my tap shoes, my tuxedo, my camel hair coat, which was my pride and joy. And I was going to go off the roof because I figured that's where I had to go off the roof because I wasn't going down below. When a man comes through the door, running, put his hands, ran right to a window, took it right out. And of course, when I saw that, and the smoke behind him, I said, this is no place for Marshall Cole. I'm getting out of here fast. So I followed him through the window. But by that time, the chorus girls and everybody came out. behind me because I went out through the window. And of course, we were looking for a way to get off the roof. You had to get off the roof. So when you get out in the roof, I knew there was flames to the left of me because that's where I saw the smoke and the flames. But then there was flames at the other end too, and I'm saying, oh my God, there's fire everywhere. There's fire underneath me. There must be fire. We got to get off here fast. So we found a ladder, small ladder that fell short there, just on the rooftop. So there were three fellows that held the ladder so that the chorus girl started to get down.
As you can,
When did you know something was wrong?
As you can see, that's a very dramatic testimony. And like so many things, the testimony from a lot of the people, there was a lot of contradictions. I mean, one of the problems I had when writing my book, I wrote my book on the Coconut GroveFire, this little book, The Coconut Grove. You can't see it with the background, but there was a lot of difficulty in determining what was the real story. And you make your best guess. As historians, as a society, you know what that is. You just have to make your best guess. Now, this is an interesting picture because this shows the fire at the Coconut Grove. You can see it burning. A lot of firefighters got here and unfortunately were scarred for life because they couldn't rescue a lot of the people behind the revolving door because it was too hot. But the fire was put out relatively quickly and it became more of a cleanup. I mean, the fire roared through the building and left a lot of people there. People were rushed to the local hospitals, and you can see a lot of the people suffered really bad burns. And there were a lot of people who suffered lung injuries. This person has an M on her forehead because she was given methadone, or morphine. They wanted to make sure she was okay, but you can see it was a very high toll. This is one of the lists of the people who died in the fire. And sadly enough, you'll find the name you'll find the name of Mickey Sheridan right here. But oddly enough, he didn't die in the fire, but his wife did. And so it's very sad. But here's some other pictures. I mean, it was confusion. People didn't know how many people were there. People all over the city were calling up, because if their kids didn't come home, they were afraid. Did they go to the Coconut Grove? So it really affected everybody throughout the greater Boston area. Everyone was very upset about it. And it was a high death toll. We'll get into that, but you can see that they had to bring in a lot of caskets at the mortuary. One of the fatalities in this was Buck Jones. There's a story that he went back in to help rescue people. That's probably not true, but he did die in the fire after a few days. His wife tried to get there, but unfortunately he died before she made it. So she was one of the deaths. And here are some of the pictures of the people who died in the fire. I mean, it's one of the hardest things as a researcher about this was to look at many of these pictures that were in the archives that they accessed, the Globe and the Herald, and just see all these faces of people, this bright, shining faces of people. What could they have done in their lives? I mean, it's just so tragic. It was just hard, very hard for me to even put my head around it. And you can see all the injuries there. This is a particularly awful story. It has an interesting ending though. But a young woman named Anne Clark from New Hampshire came down with her boyfriend, Fred Sharby Jr. And she went to the club. She and her parents and his parents all went to the game at Fenway, and then they went to the club. I mean, it was just, can you imagine such a treat for the young people to be taking the club? Well, they got caught in the fire, and Mr. and Mrs. Clark died. Mr. Sharby died. Fred died. Mrs. Sharby survived, and Anne Clark sort of clung to life. She was badly hurt, but she did survive. So the toll, it's interesting because I'm working with somebody, and I'll explain that more, about exactly how many people were killed. And it's a little hard to estimate. And we know there were at least 490 deaths. And there was one that was several months after the fire. There was one survivor who committed suicide because he was so racked with guilt that he survived and his wife didn't survive. So he's often listed among the toll. And many of the people were also injured. There was a lot of really severe injuries, and a lot of people with psychological trauma. And at that time, there was not a lot of information about how you dealt with survivor's guilt or post-traumatic shock. So some of the first psychological studies of this issue were done on the Coconut Grove survivors by a guy named Eric Lindemann, I believe it is, a psychologist or psychiatrist, who looked at this issue. Because we know you can survive and you can get out, but that doesn't mean you don't have injuries that may not be visible to the eye. Okay, so let's go back to the issue of what caused the fire. Was it that busboys match? I mean, it seems kind of obvious, and yet that scenario was very quickly doubted. There are a lot of odd things about this fire. For example, here is a look at, I believe it was the Melody Lounge downstairs, or might have been the Broadway Lounge, and you can see a lot of things did not burn. It did not reach what a lot of firefighters would call flashover, which is what happened at the Station Nightclub fires. It got so hot that it burned everything, and a lot of things survived. You can see here a lot of things, a bongo drum, there, even some of the trees, the Coconut Grove trees, the palm trees, they survived too. So not everything burned up. So what could cause a fire that moved so quickly through the building, but didn't burn everything up? That, like a flashover, that caused some people to puzzle over that. So here's a picture of the thing. Stanley Tomaszewski, who was the young busboy, 15 years old. I think he was working there illegally. He was supporting his mother. I think his father was either not working or may have been gone. And the police just were very impressed with him, although at first they demanded to know, he was apparently Polish, so they demanded to know why he was speaking with an accent. Remember, this is 1942 and they're afraid of spies, but he just came forward. He said, look, if I did it, I'm sorry, but I thought I put out the match before I brought it down. So at first everyone was saying busboys match causes fire. But then the headlines started to say, no, the busboy did not start the fire. It must have been something else. How could one match have caused all this problem? So there was a lot of speculation about that. And we'll talk about that in a bit, but what the real cause of the fire was. But there was a lot of pressure that fell on poor Stanley Tomaszewski. And I want to play a little video here that I was speaking in Hull. And this man just got up to talk about his relative, Stanley Tomaszewski. And I just pulled out my camera and I started filming him. And he just tells this very poignant story about the young man. So let me see if I can get this to play here.
Lighting the fire. Stanley was a hard worker. His father was unemployed. He was trying to help his mother out. Saturday morning, he would get the wagon. He'd go out selling fruit and vegetable. At night, he went to the Coconut Grove, making himself a few bucks for his mother. He ended up being a captain in the Army, had a very successful life, did handle all kinds of books for big companies, and I visited him so many times, and he just felt so bad that he'd get blamed, and people were spitting on him and calling him at all hours of the morning to blast him out, being the culprit, and it wasn't so. I'm only 89, and I'm still enjoying my life. And it's so nice to speak my piece here. God love you, Stanley. Lighting the fire.
So you can see we are still, in so many ways, still telling the story of this fire by people who come up with these stories. Now, one thing, if Stanley's match didn't cause the fire, what did? And there were a lot of theories that came around. One was that there was burning film because the building had been a garage and it had been a movie distribution area, and film was very flammable. So maybe that was it. Maybe people were drinking so much that the alcohol from their drinks ignited. Was there combustion from the wall furnishings, the coverings, the palm trees? Or was there sabotage by German agents or by Wolanski's gangster friends? And there were a lot of thoughts about that. I wouldn't necessarily dismiss that out of hand. A lot of people wondered about that, particularly Wolanski's enemies. One thing that I'm going to say is that officially the Coconut Grove is unsolved. Basically, the official conclusions is that they are unable to say that the boy, meaning Tomaszewski, did this, and it's going to be of unknown origin. And the state fire marshal, Steve Garrity, also concluded that we don't know. Now, a lot of firefighters I talked to today say, this is kind of ridiculous. It was the match. It's pretty obvious. But for some reason, they wanted to let the boy off the hook. And so this happened. But there are many, many other theories that I won't get into about what happened, including something called the methyl chloride theory. But again, lots of stories. Someday, maybe some fire group will do a modeling of this and we'll get better ideas of what happened in this fire. So, one thing that was interesting is that in terms of a trial, today everyone sues everybody. In this case, 11 people are indicted, but only 4 people actually went to trial about what happened in this fire. It was Barney Wolanski and his brother, James Wolanski, who was actually there the night of the fire. Barney wasn't even there the night of the fire. Barney was in the hospital. But, and then also the wine steward went on. And apparently the wine steward, because at one point people were trying to get out and he was trying to stop people saying, no, you got to pay your bill. You got to pay your bill. So those 3 people went on trial, and only Barney Wolanski was convicted of manslaughter. And the manslaughter he was convicted of was keeping an unsafe condition. And this was a precedent-setting decision because it showed that, if you don't have safety precautions in your building, you can be liable for the deaths of people. And this is being used this was used again in the Station Nightclub fire. So it set a lot of precedents. Barney was guilty. He was sentenced to 12 to 15 years. He was later, his sentence was commuted by the Governor Tobin, who he was rather close to, and he got out, but he died very soon after that. And he apparently told reporters, he said, "I wish I died with the rest of them in the fire." He was a broken man. So what have been the results of this horrible story? It obviously affected a lot of people throughout Boston, but there's some other things that happened. For one thing, there were new techniques in burn and lung treatments that were used on the victims of the fire. At MGH and Boston City Hospital, they did things that they hadn't done before, and they found these treatments, particularly the burn treatments, to be very effective, and they continue to use them today. So they actually learned quite a bit about how you treat bad burns. They also use penicillin. For the first time on a civilian population, penicillin was brought in and was administered to try to keep down infections. Was it in a large enough dosage to really make an impact? We don't really know, but it was used. I mentioned the legal precedents that were set. The fire had a lot of impact on the case law and how we look at proprietors and buildings that don't keep things safe. And then safety rule enforcements. For example, and let me emphasize the word enforcement. Before this, there was for example, revolving doors. Before this, there was knowledge that revolving doors were dangerous. They could jam. There was a problem, and that the groups like the National Fire Protection Association said, if you have a revolving door, you should have 2 regular doors, swing doors nearby, so you could get out if it jams. But that was not enforced. But after the fire, like everything else, started to enforce it. So it had a real impact in terms of getting people to enforce rules. In a lot of cases, they already knew, but they didn't have the political will to enforce them or to put them into effect. Other things were occupancy, like I said, the club was licensed for about 500 people, and there were at least 1,000 people in there that night. So it was overcrowded. So one thing that we're still learning, the thing I want to emphasize is that history is still evolving. I think Faulkner said, the past is never past, it's not even past, or something to that effect. We are still learning about this fire, its impact on their families. I still meet people, and there's still a lot of unsolved mysteries that we keep going on. Here's one really kind of neat thing. In November 30th, 2013, they dedicated this street, the Coconut Grove Lane. There used to be some Shawmut Street extension right in the Coconut Grove, right on the footprint, which I think helps to keep the memory of this fire alive. I told you about Ann Clark. This is Ann Clark. She survived the fire. She went on to have a wonderful life with marriage and kids and grandchildren. And every year she would give away the Fred Charby Trophy, given to football players in New Hampshire. She did die a few years ago, but I managed to talk to her, and she was just a wonderful person. This is a picture of her parents that she's holding up. So she managed to get through the fire and go on to a very nice life. This woman brought me a watch that she said was found on her aunt who died in the Coconut Grove. I just thought this was interesting. Some people have approached me about getting drink tickets, a menu from the fire, from the night of the Coconut Grove fire. So I thought that was interesting. Joseph Short brought in a wallet of his uncle who died in the fire, and this was the contents of what was in his wallet, including a $1 bill in his wallet there. I think I'll pass this up here. But one thing I want to talk about is a lot of the resources for you, because a lot of people want to research this fire, and I encourage everyone to kind of look into it. And one is an archive that's been put together by the National Fire Protection Association, the Coconut Grove Archive, which has a lot of material there. It's kind of fallen apart, right, because there's no one to really run it, but it has a lot of information. This is some of the material that's there. That's the website for it. Well, something that happened is that transcripts from the Boston Police Department were put up online. So you can not only look through these transcripts, you can search them. And I don't know if you do research, but to search a document is very important. So this is an amazing resource for people looking into the fire. And then one of the most important things is that there's been a documentary, 6 Locked Doors, The Legacy of Coconut Grove. This was put together by a guy named Zachary Graves Miller. He put together this documentary. It's aired at a number of venues. I think he's working on getting it on PBS or something like that. But it's really, and it has some of the last interviews with some of the people who survived the fire. So it's a really remarkable documentary. Of course, I'm quoted in it, so I have to talk it up, but it really is good, and hopefully there'll be a time that you can watch that. In 2017, there was a 75th anniversary commemoration of the Coconut Grove. All these different aspects of it, from the nurses to the mortality rates to all kinds of things. It was really, really good, and I think when we get to the 100th anniversary, we'll probably have another one. I'm hoping to still be around then, but we'll see. Here's something that I think is very important to mention. Here's Piedmont Street, and this picture was taken from Church Street in 2010. And this is the footprint of the Coconut Grove, and it was like this for a very long time, It was a parking lot, and this is a site. And if you can see, right here is a plaque in the side of the sidewalk. That's a close-up of it. It was actually created by a young man who survived the fire, so it has a lot of resonance. And it was put up in 1993, and it's in memory. And that's really great. It's a small, I mean, I would go there some nights on the Anarchist Fire and people would put flowers there. But guess what? This being Boston, that area has now been turned into luxury condos. Entirely luxury condos. And you know that plaque in the sidewalk? They didn't want it there. So it's been moved to this corner because they didn't want people who lived in this condo to be reminded of the people who died on that spot, 75 years ago. I don't know. So that's that. But let me give you some good news about this. And I think this is very important. This is Statler Park. It's very near where the Coconut Grove is here. You can see there's the Statler Park there. And this is the site of the original go. Well, a group of people, some really, Mike Hanlon and some other folks have formed a coalition to try to get a memorial in this spot, because it's not going to work on the site, but a memorial that will commemorate the Coconut Grove. I mean, it's a huge fire. It had a huge impact in Boston history, and now they're looking at commemorating it. So I'm going to show you some really cool things. This is what it might look like. This is some plans that have been submitted to the city council. They're going through trying to get the approval of this. It obviously needs a lot of money and needs approvals and all that, but that's what it would look like if they will put it in. And the idea is that they put it in this, you can kind of see where they put it right here. So it's not right on the site, but it's very close by. And it's just a way of helping us remember all the people who died there and the people's lives who were so very affected. I mean, it wasn't just the victims, it was the people who, the doctors and the nurses who treated the people. It was the families of the victims. It was the firefighters who were forever scarred by it. It was the police officers. There was so much effect from this fire that I just think it's really great that they're trying to put in a memorial to it that will help to teach the next generation what happened, with the idea that if we don't repeat these lessons, they get repeated. So we need to repeat these lessons over and over again. So that's my piece here. And usually I end up by asking people to share their Coconut Grove stories, because many people I know who are going to be listening to this will have your own Coconut Grove story to share. And maybe at some point you can set it up in some sort of website or something like that. But again, I really thank you for giving me the opportunity to tell the story. It's very sad, but it really is a real story of Boston. It is a real story of what can happen if we're not being vigilant. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Stephanie, that was wonderful.
Okay.
You also had the Coconut Grove fire. You wrote the book also. Right.
I was going to say, maybe I'll, let me see if I can put it, it's funny, but when you have the background, but I have a book, it's on the other thing, but it's on the Coconut Grove. So it's a very small book, but it's about the fire. So if anybody wants to
very nice
into this further, it's just called the Coconut Grove Fire. You can get it at Amazon. You can get it from a local, your local bookstore. You can get it at libraries. There's a lot of libraries that have it. So if you want to read more about this, then you can pick up that book and see what I say there.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, no, thank you.
Thank you. The Shrewsbury Public Library will be presenting a virtual program titled Abigail Adams presented by Cheryl Fay, Saturday, March 27th, 2 to 3. The library website has information regarding registration. In April, we'll have Covered Bridges in Central Mass by Bill Caswell. We hope you'll see you with all then. Thank you very much for coming out tonight.